Now, before last week's chemical attack and the subsequent US airstrikes, President Assad said the United States under Donald Trump could be a potential partner. But in his first interview since the attack, Syria's leader said that Washington's hand in glove with terrorists. Relations with Russia are not much better, as Donald Trump has described them as at an all-time low.
It would be wonderful, as we were discussing just a little while ago, if NATO and our country could get along with Russia. Right now, we're not getting along with Russia at all. We may be at an all-time low in terms of relationship with Russia. This is built for a long period of time. But we're going to see what happens. Putin is the leader of Russia. Russia's a strong country. We're a very, very strong country. We're going to see how that all works out.
Whoa, that was last night. Today he's more upbeat, tweeting just a short while ago that things will work out fine between the USA and Russia. At the right time, everyone will come to their senses and there will be lasting peace, apparently. So what now? Let's speak to Foreign Affairs writer Tim Marshall and historian at Oxford University and author of The Silk Roads, Dr. Peter Frankopan. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us. Tim, to you first of all, how bad is it?
Not that bad. I mean, what day is it? What year is it? Who's the president? Which day is it? Which tweet is it? I think today's tweet is better than yesterday's tweet. A low, he knows there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they were nose-to-nose of nuclear war with each other in the early 60s. After that, they had thousands of missiles pointing at each other's cities. You can move on from that to Reagan calling Russia, or the Soviet Union, the evil empire. You can move on from that for the failed reset of Obama and Putin, which didn't go well. And then
they were not happy at all, were they?
Oh, you remember when they went to not Belfast, they went to Northern Ireland for G8, I think it was.
Yeah.
And they could barely look at each other. I think relations were just as bad then as they were after the Georgia War, after they were after the Ukraine invasion. So I just think we're back to the orange hyperbole, and we're back to reminding ourselves of the most important thing said about Trump during the election campaign. The voters for him take him seriously but not literally. The media take him literally but not seriously. I don't take him literally when he says things have never been worse.
What do you think, Doctor?
Well, I think it's tricky to tell. As Tim just said, I have 1 minute promising peace and salvation, the next minute all-out war. I guess the big problem with Trump is that the real problem with US policy is they don't quite know how to deal with Russia, whether it's better to use a carrot or a stick. And the problem with all of this messaging is that it's entirely right that diplomacy and political statements, it's all rhetoric, it's all theatre, and it's what goes on behind closed doors and in the back channels that's more important. I think what we forget is that this isn't just about Russia and the United States, that there are billions of people elsewhere around the world watching to see what happens between Washington and Moscow, particularly in Beijing. It's no coincidence, I think, that Trump organized the strike on Syria, not Iraq, as in fact he mentioned yesterday, on Syria when he was having dinner with Xi of China. And I think that we do need to remember that this is it's a fast-changing world where in the 21st century, the West looks like increasingly our track record of shooting first and asking questions second looks up for grabs. And I think what the Russians are probably quite pleased about is that Trump looks unpredictable, and that makes it hard for them to deal with him, and it makes it hard for everybody else to deal with him as well. Okay. So although Tim is entirely right that it depends which day of the week we're looking at, and one shouldn't take it all too literally, other people around the world, I think, are trying to work out what kind of American administration this is. And I think yesterday's performance, the theatre of having Tillerson in Moscow and then having the veto at the UN Security Council, where the Russian ambassador to the UN pointed at the British ambassador and said, "Look at me while I'm speaking." That kind of stuff is all quite serious because it's quite hard to mend bridges that are publicly burnt.
Syria, big issue, big deal. How are they going to patch it up?
They're not, although at the end of the Lavrov-Tillerson meeting in Moscow yesterday, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, did offer to re-engage what's called the deconfliction process. That's when the two air forces are close to each other over Syrian airspace. You need deconfliction, right? I'm going to be there at this point of time. Let's not crash into each other. So he's offered a little bit of an olive branch, albeit with some conditions attached. So they will come back. They will learn to engage and cooperate up to a point. But they have diametrically opposed aims in Syria, and so they're not going to solve it. We have this thing that everything is solvable. America cannot solve the Middle East. Even if it put its entire military force there, it still wouldn't solve it. So you say to the public, we're taking firm action, we're doing this. And in fact, you manage it. Not with this, this wasn't strategy, this cruise missile attack. This was tactics. Okay, you bomb them and say, don't do that again, while simultaneously, and this was the more important message, saying to Russia and China, look how unpredictable we are, you've achieved a short-term strategic gain, tactical gain, because strategically, at the moment, there isn't a solution.
Doctor?
Yeah, well, Tillerson was very careful to give Lavrov was very careful to give a history lesson yesterday and to remind that the removal of Gaddafi, of Saddam Hussein, the track record of getting rid of dictators, that it's much easier to try to remove people than it is to work out what happens afterwards. And that, as Tim says, the short-term gain of trying to rap someone on the knuckles and punish, even those 59 Tomahawks didn't stop Syrian jets taking off from the same airfield the next day. So I think when the world sees policy being made on the hoof, and according to Trump's son, Donald Trump had been upset by seeing the pictures of dead children, and his daughter had convinced him into taking action. The question really is, how does the international order try to resolve Syria? And I think what from Moscow's point of view, the more that a solution doesn't appear, and the more the Americans try to solve it, the more that plays to Moscow's strengths, which is saying, look, we may not be willing to put up with Assad at any price, which is what Lavrov again said yesterday. But at the same time, we need to work backwards from what the conclusion point is. And I think that that's a very powerful message in other parts of the world that don't just see this as a Syrian problem and the US and Syria. They see this as part of something much more connected. They see this as part of the dispatch of the Carl Vinson and a strike group to the Korean Peninsula. They see this within the context of Afghanistan, within the context of Iraq. That the way in which things get resolved, or whether they don't get resolved, as Tim says, the way in which we have taken the lead in the West hasn't produced any results.
What, if anything, does the UK have? What role do we have in all of this?
Oh, extremely limited. Extremely limited. I mean, you saw...
Although we've seen the pointing fingers, as we've heard there from the doctor, and also the fact during the UN emergency session, the Russians particularly picking out Brits.
Yeah, because Boris Johnson went to the G7 and said, come on, we need to have some strong action. And you can make a very strong case for that. And allegedly, the Foreign Office told him we can make a strong case for this, and some of the other countries will be with you. And then when it came to it, they weren't. I mean, Italy was never going to be with. Italy and the Russians are becoming friendlier. Germany is looking in the long-term relationship with Russia. The French are all over the place at the moment. So they didn't go with Johnson. But I think that thing yesterday that Peter referred to is a bit of a slap for the British, saying to everyone, come on, everyone, pony it up. The influence is limited both diplomatically and militarily. We are not in the game.
Doctor?
Well, I think we're all sick and tired of Brexit being blamed for anything and everything. But, I think that Britain's role in the world has clearly changed because of the 23rd of June, because we're not able to bring European partners with us in the same way that perhaps we once could. And we're not able to put the brake on the United States or to encourage the United States one way or the other. And I think we need to come to terms with our own changing relationship with the outside world. We do have a seat on the Security Council. We do have a well-oiled, smart Foreign Office. With very intelligent civil servants trying to pick a way through, not just for the Syrian people, but for Russia, the United States, and to play a very important intermediary role. But I think that yesterday's result of trying to get sanctions and that failing, of being slapped down publicly in the UN, is a way of very publicly showing that Britain's role is contracting. And it's very hard to see how we change that. I think that the role that Britain has in the wider world is up for grabs right now. In terms of where do we go in terms of trading, in terms of our relations with our European partners, in terms of NATO and so on. But I think it's very hard to escape the fact that we are more irrelevant than we were beforehand. And I suppose that that's not in itself a problem. The world changes. But right now, a voice of calm, talking to try to bring all sides to the table is what's needed. And it's conspicuous that we weren't able to do that yesterday.
I've been fortunate enough to meet Peter in person, and irritatingly, we agreed on most things. However, on that last point, I do disagree with him. I think that the UK, once the aircraft carriers come on stream in 2020,
yeah.
If they've got the right aircraft, and the nuclear deterrent, and the fact that the UK is then operating completely independently and picks and chooses, I think the UK is actually going to have something of a resurgence of, albeit limited, military power. I'm not making an argument for or against Brexit. And also, I'm going way off subject on Syria, Russia. But I do think that Britain will be projecting power in the future. But at the moment, it is in a weak position diplomatically, certainly within the EU. And until militarily the aircraft carriers come on stream, I don't think it's in that strong a position. But Russia, Syria, this is, I mean, I've said this to you, it's really sad, Kay, I've said this to you probably every year for the past 5 years. This has got at least another year to go. You know, and I'm not saying that it won't go on for another 5 years.
The civil war.
The civil war in Syria, but it might do. But even if you can start putting the building blocks together, it's got at least another year to go, because Russia hasn't achieved what it wants, Assad hasn't achieved what it wants, Iran hasn't achieved what it wants, and America hasn't achieved what it wants. So at the moment, the building blocks aren't there yet.
Do you concur, Doctor?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, again, you know, it's sort of grist to my mill, really, I suppose, having written a book about the Silk Roads. But, you know, when one looks at Turkey, where there's a fundamental change in potentially the powers that President Erdogan is going to have through Syria and through Iraq, we look at Ukraine as well, where there's no resolution. We see, you know, potential problems in Central Asian republics to do with fundamentalism and terrorism. You know, the Stockholm attacker from Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, where the situation has got much worse, and then Korea out to the other side. You know, I think that you know, it's important to join this all up together. The world is changing fundamentally around us, and Tim is, you know, we as he said, we don't necessarily agree on everything, but on most things, I think we sing from the same playlist. That the biggest problem we have right now is that we need to have young women, men and women coming through the systems who know these countries, know these languages, and you know, it's no coincidence. We pulled back our ambassador from Moscow to handle Brexit negotiations at a time when our communications with Moscow have never been more important. So, you know, Trump is right this afternoon or this morning at his time to say the world is going to keep on turning. There's no reason to panic. But, you know, trying to force people to come to the table to negotiate, Moscow has a lot more to gain than it has to lose by making the US look like it's a country that puts its foot in its mouth all the time. And unfortunately, that is what Trump is doing with his obsessive Twitter feed, where 1 minute it's light, 1 minute it's dark.
Okay. For now, Doctor, thanks very much indeed. Nifty plug for his book there. Your latest book?
Oh, thank you. Worth Dying For. Out in hardback at the moment. The Power and Politics of Flags. God Bless You, out in paperback next month.
Very good, thank you.